All right. And then a little bit, let's just sit here. Okay. As we're discussing. So, Father Sean, thanks for doing this concert with the Thayer Symphony. We're really excited to have you, and I thought it'd be a way to talk a little bit about the piece, the Mozart, and your reflections on it, and kind of why you chose this one of all the many beautiful ones. And looking at your resume, you had a lot to do with, for example, opera with Mozart.
Right.
And I think it's kind of interesting. A composer running these probably top of the line in modern way of speaking operas, considered to be some of the best in the world, Don Giovanni, Cosi fan tutte. And then the concertos, which also the finest concertos ever written. Such beautiful music. It stood the test of time. And just on a personal level, just studying the score. But I remember seeing that movie Amadeus when I was a kid, and I loved that movie because it felt it's kind of a selfish kind of thing that I felt like I understood Mozart better through that movie.
A lot of people did. Oh, yeah. Well, even my parents, who are not really into music that much, once they saw Amadeus, they were buying Mozart records and stuff like that. So it turned a lot of people on to Mozart's music.
Yeah. So what do you think? Is there any particular reason why have you ever had a history with this piece, so to speak?
Yes, I played this piece many years ago, I think about 15 years ago with the Louisiana Philharmonic. And I've just always loved this piece because I feel like it's the first really great piano concerto that Mozart wrote. The first, and then of course there was a whole series of great ones after it.
Right.
But it seems like if you listen to the concertos he wrote before this one, there's something about this where he made this tremendous leap forward. And the other concerto before it, for example, was written just a couple of months before. But the difference is just astounding. And I don't know what it was, but it seems like he really became inspired when he wrote this piece. So to me, it's the best of earlier Mozart. We don't often hear earlier Mozart, but this to me is a breakthrough piece for him. And plus, it also has this gorgeous slow movement in the minor key, which is rather unusual for Mozart to have a major key composition, and the second movement would be in the minor.
These two pillars on either side, and the middle of the house, so to speak, in a minor key.
Yeah, and the contrast is amazing because the first movement and the third movement are these jovial, very happy, lively pieces, and then you get this really pathetic utterance in the slow movement. Pathetic in the sense of, really deeply felt sorrow.
Yeah.
And to me, it's kind of unique. There's another piece that Mozart wrote a little bit later, which is not called a concerto, but it's called a Sinfonia Concertante for violin and viola and orchestra. It's also in E-flat, and in that piece he also writes a beautiful, beautiful slow movement in C minor, and actually uses some of the material from this piece in that. And that piece has also been always one of my all-time favorite Mozart pieces. So I think for a lot of those reasons, that was why I wanted to play this particular concerto so much.
Yeah, that's. I think for our audience, that's very interesting. A very reflective piece, and it's good to kind of know this, and who knows what Mozart was going through in his life, or if anything.
Right. We don't know if there's some kind of biographical incident that happened that would have inspired this. Now, we do know that he wrote this piece for a visiting French woman pianist, and whose name was Madame Genome. And so now we know this as the Genome Concerto.
Right.
But he might have been inspired by her, actually, to come up with something that was really, really the best that he could possibly produce. And who knows, maybe there was some kind of, reflection of his own difficulties with in his own love life. Who knows?
Yeah.
What would have produced this incredible slow movement?
That's a fascinating thing about a great composer, great works in music. most of our great composers are no longer living, but they live on. It's a form of immortality through the music, and it gives us probably decades of things to think about.
And it also lets us into their inner world in a way that words can't do.
Right.
So, with other great historic figures, we have their letters and all that stuff. We have a lot of letters from Mozart too. But to have their music and for us to be able to feel what they felt is something which is a wonderful thing about music, I think.
Could you maybe just show us a little snippet of...
Yeah, the first movement itself is also rather extraordinary, because usually with most concertos that Mozart and others wrote, the pianist comes out and waits for a long time to play, while the orchestra is playing all the introductory material. But for some reason, Mozart was moved to have the pianist come in right away. So the orchestra goes, and right away the piano goes, and then allows the orchestra to do the expository material until then the soloist comes in. So right away there's kind of a brashness about this composition.
It makes me think of his operas, where he really had understanding of theatrics in a way.
Absolutely. This is a real theatrical gesture that wouldn't have been expected.
Yeah.
And by the way, when we talk about opera, of course, Mozart thought of himself as being primarily an opera composer. And but I think it's his operatic genius that made the piano concerto such a great vehicle for him, because he thought of it as being a kind of a dramatic dialogue and give and take between the soloist and the orchestra. And so it's kind of like these two different characters that are vying for attention and giving to one another or taking from one another, until finally at the end everything comes together. And I think just opening with a brash statement like that immediately says we're going to have some drama here coming up.
The curtain is going up.
The curtain is, that's exactly right. I think that's true. So then, of course, the rest of the movement is this beautifully developed and very the key of E flat also has a certain nobility about it, and so whenever Mozart writes in that key, there's also a feeling of nobility, which we get in this piece as well. Also, we have all the cadenzas for this concerto that were written out by Mozart, which isn't what we have for all of the concertos. But he must have thought that this one was special to be able to write out the cadenzas. So, of course, I'll be playing Mozart's cadenzas. And then, after this very bright first movement, then we have this second movement. So heartfelt.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, and to me, that's the real artistic highlight of this concerto is in that slow movement. And then at the very end of it, we have this cadence that both the piano and the orchestra plays together. Right. And then the piano starts right away. So right away, it's this amazing change of mood, you know. But then there's one other thing about the third movement, which is so amazing, is that in the development section, all of a sudden the music comes to a stop. There's a... and then the piano does this, you know, this little lead-in. And then it starts a minuet in a totally different feel. Talk about aristocratic.
You're right,
you
a
know?
different time.
Yes, and in the key of A flat. And so we go through quite a big section where we have this minuet, and then finally, at the end of that, Mozart, of course, will go back to, and then it ends in really high.
Like going home again.
Yeah, and then it just ends in incredibly jovial, happy spirits. So I feel like we go through the gamut with this concerto.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
we go through a sense of nobility and kind of this classical poise in a lot of it, through a kind of almost romantic heart-wrenching, and then where Mozart is just kind of unbuttoned and laughing, you know, and in great spirits for the rest of the piece, and so it's a marvelous journey, I
Yes.
think, to go through the entire piece.
Well, I'm very excited, and I think our audience will be very excited to hearing you and meeting you for our concert on April 11th in Fitchburg at the Monty Tech Concert Hall. And yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to it too.
Yeah,
I can't
me
wait.
too.